Hello, and welcome to Fifi and the In-Between, the channel for original fantasy short stories to occupy your mind and inspire your deepest self. This story is The City Underground. A cat lurked quietly, hoping to go unnoticed. His name was Aniko, although whoever chose that name was long gone and forgotten. The name suited him well because it was a noble name, the name of the first Basque king. Also, because it meant, my little dear one. And so, someone must have really cherished him once. Aniko lived on the edge of a large, sprawling city where kitchens were little more than open fireplaces and alleyways were dust and garbage. He had a thin, uneven gray coat, the color of soot rubbed into linen. His eyes reflected even the smallest glimmers of light with a careful, almost predatory attention. He belonged, loosely, to Ekshida. Ekshida was not young, but she was small. She worked mending coats in a narrow room that smelt like cabbage water and iron. Her fingers were steady. Her voice, quiet. She spoke to Aniko as if he were a friend, rather than a feral cat. And this arrangement pleased them both. She was treated like a burden by her aunt, who had taken her in after her parents had died, when their apartment was swallowed by a fire. Ekshida was delivering the day's work to thankful customers. When she returned, nothing was left of them. Now she slept in her aunt's bathtub. But a single cough or a sneeze would be enough to cause them to send her outside, no matter the weather, to be sick around someone else. They didn't want their children getting sick too. The city pressed inward each year. More people, fewer rooms, more shouting, fewer kindnesses. The sewers clogged, the rats grew vicious. The ground itself seemed overburdened, and sometimes, when Aniko slept with his stiff whiskers against the ground, he felt a vibration beneath him, like a dreamtime thought trying to escape. It was on an afternoon thick with heat and discomfort that Ekshida did not come home. That evening, Aniko went to his friend's window and waited. He waited through the night, sure she would awake and let him in. He listened to the voices of the neighbors, the clatter of the plates, the minor tragedies of nightlife. He nervously licked his paws as the hours passed. Even when she was very sick, she always left him something on the windowsill. A fishtail, some tallow on bread. But tonight, the windowsill was barren. He waited until his eyelids drooped and his thoughts faded. He awoke not to hunger, but to a powerful, unpleasant smell. Damp, bitter, threaded with rot. It rose from the bushes below him. Aniko stood alert and listened. There was a slight vibration from the ground, almost imperceivable. Beneath the building, beneath the alley, beneath the city, something was moving. Slowly, but hungrily. The cat sniffed the air, stretched his legs and claws, and decided to find the source of the smell, as terrible as it was. Aniko wrapped himself around the corner, down past the leaking bags of garbage, where peels and bones spill out. This was not the smell, but he was getting closer. He found a crack at the base of a shadowed corner where plant roots pushed through the cement like bloody knuckles. Cats understand something humans don't: the thresholds between worlds. They are not troubled by them, but they respect them. They swat at them and hiss, but they rarely pass through. He peered into a surprisingly large gap where the building had given up holding itself together and crumbled inwards. Through the crack, he saw something he hadn't seen in a while. The underworld. resembled the city above, though no one had planned it that way. But there were differences. The streets were made of thick roots that refused to be trampled and worn down into something even and smooth. Buildings were mere frameworks, the start of ideas never finished. Walls of bones, some with flesh still attached, and they rose high in columns. Everything leaned, curved, or swayed. The air there was sentient, listening for new citizens. Lost voices separated from their bodies murmured to themselves. This was not a place of judgment, nor of fire. It was a place of accumulation. The dead arrived carrying what they had not finished: novels, feuds, dreams, unresolved breakups, unspoken apologies. The burdens became heavy and were abandoned. Once on the ground, the abandoned objects sank into the rocky earth and became roots. The roots tangled. The tangles became neighborhoods. Iniko moved carefully. He was small and nearly silent, but living bodies weren't subtle in the underworld. He passed figures seated on crates, waiting for nothing in particular while they sighed heavily. He passed children who kicked at skulls, hoping for rats to shoot out of them. He passed wealthy bankers, holding tight to useless money that had dissolved into damp pulp. No one stopped him, or even noticed. Cats were understood to be messengers, and none of these shadows had hope that someone was trying to contact them. It was safer not to ask than to be disappointed. He smelled Ekshita everywhere, faintly. Her hair oil, her stale saliva, the iron tang of blood from her cough. The scent threaded through the streets and lingered there. As he padded along with determination, Iniko recalled the underworld's rules, which were not written, but enforced by habit. Nothing was thrown away. Everything that did not sink piled up. Those who tried to leave found themselves distracted. A half of a note on a ground, the bottom half missing. Or the familiar sound of boots crunching in a dark corner of a crumpled beginning of a tower. A puzzle missing pieces, a jar of mismatched buttons. Once they looked, they were lost, forgetting their purpose. At a crossroads of roots, Iniko met a woman counting bent nails. She appeared to have been counting them for a long time. "They don't change," she said to him as he passed, not looking up. "Always the same number, and I'm never sure." Curious, Iniko sat and watched. She lined the nails in one long row and sighed with mild frustration. She had noticed me, even if she hadn't bothered to look up, he thought. Maybe she would have noticed Ekshita. He cleared his throat gently, so as not to be rude. "Have you seen a new woman here recently? She's very small. She coughs and sneezes a lot. But she is kind." In the underworld, cats' voices can be understood, which is sometimes helpful and sometimes a problem. Nico hoped this would be one of the times that his voice would help him. The woman huffed, losing her concentration, quickly gathering up the nails and throwing them in a fit. "Damn it! I don't have time for this." She wouldn't help me to count, but she smelled of cabbage water, and she went deeper. People who fix things are always asked to fix one more. And she did fix my sweater. There were holes that let bugs in. But she wouldn't help with the nails, so I told her to leave. "Was she alive?" The woman smiled with one side of her mouth. "Hard to tell," she said. "Didn't talk much." Iniko nodded and continued following Ekshita's scent. The woman rose, agitated, and began gathering the scattered nails. The deeper Aniko went into the underworld, the damper it became. Roots hung overhead like chandeliers, slowly dripping water, which occasionally struck his body. He cringed as each drop slid down through his thin coat and soaked his skin. The crowd thickened the deeper he went. Disputes simmered and hummed. There were no authorities to turn to, and the habit of bickering filled the space. Nico danced through the slow-moving crowd, avoiding clumsy feet, and soon found himself in an open cavern resembling the city square. There, Iniko spotted Ekshida. She sat on a broken crate mending. The coat in her lap was enormous. It swallowed her legs and draped around her body like a heavy snake. The tear she worked on ran the length of a tall man's arm. Her face was pale, but peaceful, as if she was tired but grateful to be away from her hateful aunts and cousins. Eniko twitched his tail pensively, and then, seeing a place to land, he jumped up towards what might be her lap. The coat shifted. The needle paused. "Eniko," she said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I think the better question is, what are you doing here?" "Have you died in the night?" She smiled. "No, but I was asked to help." "Who asked?" She nodded up towards the roots. "Them?" Around them figures gathered, not threatening, merely interested. Help here was a rare public resource. "If you finish," Nico said, "they will only give you another." "Yeah." "And another." "Yeah." He pressed his forehead against her wrist. He felt her pulse, faint but present. Still alive, he thought with relief. "You are allowed to refuse them," he said. Ekshida looked at the coat. She looked at the tear. She wanted her work to be perfect, and this was a difficult tear through leather and felt. It was important to go slowly and deliberately. "I don't know how," she said, looking into his gentle eyes for the first time since he arrived. "Look at all these people. If I don't help them, who will?" This was the problem of the underworld, not cruelty, but need. Eniko scanned the crowd. He wanted to hiss and puff himself up, warning them away. Instead, he did something more shocking. He crawled over Ekshida's hands and laid down over her arms. Cats have a talent for disrupting busy humans. The roots above them shifted. The people in the square stopped arguing and listened. Only the dripping water from the roots could be heard. After a few moments, a gruff man shouted, "What are you doing?" "Saying hello to my friend who has come to visit me," Ekshida said, smiling as Aniko's warm body rumbled with purrs. The crowd grew uneasy. Without something to distract them, their habits had nowhere to go. Ekshida's needle dropped from her hand. It slipped from the thread and buried itself in a mud puddle. She remembered that she had another life in the world above. The underworld shuddered. This was how escape began. Not with violence, but with interruption and remembering. Her life above was not beautiful, not kind, but it was hers, and she had abandoned it. As she unwrapped the coat from around her shoulders and legs, Eniko jumped down and strutted proudly. As the coat fell to the ground, the underworld loosened in one small crack, a root pushing upwards and letting in a trickle of light. Escape, Eniko knew, was not forbidden. It was merely inconvenient. and for those stuck in their ways, they preferred not to bother with the difficulties of escape. They chose to stay. Ekshida stood, brushing the thread from her skirt. She did not look like a prisoner being freed. She looked like someone who had set down a burden, only to remember that she had others back home that she still needed to overcome. Iniko pawed at the puddle where the needle had fallen. Ekshida reached down into the puddle and felt the sharp, thin needle. And she put it in her pocket. "All right, let's go, Iniko," she said. Around them, the square watched. The crowd did not care much that she was leaving. They just didn't understand what had changed for her. They were sure she wouldn't find mercy in the world above. If anything, they felt superior for their decision to stay. A man stepped forward, stopping the cat. He had been tall once, but now he was hunched over, shoulders hanging low. "She knows my work," he said, looking for an argument, gesturing to the coat. "If she leaves, it will not be finished." A woman with a filthy doll clutched to her chest spoke next, kicking at the cat. "She fixed my shoes, and they were better before when I got here." Another voice, with indignance. "If she goes, no one will care. The roots will tangle again, and the light will fade, and we will forget her stupid, ugly face." The voices began to overlap with one another, creating familiar disorder. Ekshida felt the pressure of their need. It was not theatrical. It was practical, heavy, like wet laundry. She could be useful here. Her usefulness had currency in this place. "Who was it that asked you to stay?" Iniko said quietly. Ekshida hesitated. "I told you." But something seemed unsettled in her answer. She was hiding something, which was strange. She had never hidden anything from Iniko. There was a crack in the corner of the apartment building where roots were pushing through, and I heard voices from below, and I knew they needed me. A small figure detached itself from the edge of the square. A boy. Not much older than a toddler. He carried a bundle of cloth tied with twine. "She promised," he said. His voice quivered, too young to protect himself with anger. "She said she would finish mine tomorrow." Ekshida knelt down. She touched the bundle. It was not clothing, but something like a map. Roots were sewn into it like boning, threads knotted in patterns too deliberate to be decorative. "What's this for?" she asked. "Way back," said the boy. "For my sister. She will follow me once it's repaired. I made a promise." Iniko understood. Not everyone here was dead. Some were adjacent to death, brushing against it through illness, through grief, through unfinished promises. The underworld collected them too, the way scabs collect around a wound. Hearing Ekshida's painful cough, it called her down into the darkness before death had collected her body. Ekshida closed her eyes to think. If she stayed for much longer, she may not remember her life above. She may lose herself like so many others. If she stayed, the underworld would continue doing what it did best, absorbing her efforts and channeling it into lost causes. She would become part of its infrastructure, a human root. If she left, this child's heart would break, and he would become like everyone else here. He'll stumble around, his sister's map falling apart. His shoes will become unglued, and he won't notice. Iniko waited. Cats understand stillness as a form of communication. He could hear her dilemma, but he could not make the choice for her. At last, Ekshida stood. "I'm sorry. I cannot continue my work here," she said. "These things I'm repairing are not built to function here, and you have made choices not to fix what is yours." A murmur passed through the square. Strangely, it sounded something like relief. Deep down, They like the way things have been. It is familiar and comfortable. She turned to the boy. "I will finish this," she said, touching the roots. "Although I'm not sure I know the way out." The man with the coat pushed past the woman with the doll. Others argued, voices filling the air like smoke. Iniko stepped between Ekshida and the boy. He did not bare his teeth. He did not strike. He simply met the boy's gaze. A warning not to abuse her choice. "This place feeds on almost," he said. "Almost healed, almost finished, almost forgiven. She is choosing to complete your work. Remember that." The boy clutched the bundle, feeling protective of the one thing in this whole place that could help his sister. The roots above writhed, waiting. "What about the rest of them?" the boy asked. Ekshida looked around. "They will have to start learning to repair things for themselves. But right now, they don't wish to help themselves. Look!" And as the boy glanced around, he saw the crowd was no longer interested in her. As he slowly spun around, he saw the woman with the doll pushing her fingers down into the mud just to watch the water fill the holes when she removed them. The man with the coat was searching his pockets for change. They had already lost interest in the possibility of repairs. The roots above were growing impatient, reaching towards each other to close out the light. Ekshida had to work fast. The boy talked her through the necessary stitching to bring the map into its intended shape. As she finished, little light remained. She stood and quickly climbed the path. The boy and the cat were close behind. As the disputes of the people faded, the light grew brighter. They reached the threshold, narrow, but not impossible. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the needle. She placed it carefully on the ground. "In case someone decides they want to fix what they already have," she said, looking at the boy, who smiled, grateful for the gift that he was leaving behind, a symbol of hope. They wedged themselves up through the cracks, scraping their shoulders and bellies against the rough stone as they climbed. The boy went first, then Ekshida, then Iniko. As they clawed upwards, the noise of the city wafted down to them. They followed it, feeling escape grow near. At the surface, light spilled painfully onto their faces. Air moved freely, navigating alleyways, and the boy turned back, glimpsing into the crack, expecting to see his sister. But only the cat followed. He did not understand. The cloth was supposed to call her to him. He looked over it, searching it for errors. Ekshida knelt beside him. She wanted to promise that things would work out, that his sister was okay. But hope would only hurt him more. "She will not come this way," she said. "But you can. You are being given another chance at life." The boy nodded, his eyes welling with knowing. He didn't question her words. His sister's escape was not his to decide. The cloth was a tapestry of grief that he now had to carry with him. It was something he could be angry with, something he could wear to protect himself and to hide under when he didn't want to talk to others. They felt a shudder as the ground settled, and they looked at the passage, now filled with thick roots. The boy fell into Ekshida's arms, and she held him as he cried. Iniko sat in the warm sunlight, cleaning the mud from his paws. The city continued its noise, unaware of what lay beneath it. This is how the world remained livable, pretending to be far away from death and sickness. Morning went on with its usual business. Milk soured, carts thunked along the cobblestones. A bell rang in a church tower announcing the hour. 11 o'clock. No one paused to notice the cat, the small woman, or the boy. Ekshida didn't know where to bring the boy. She didn't know his address. He didn't know where he lived. and she didn't want to invite him into her aunt's cruel home filled with hate and meaningless work. She walked up to the public spigot and washed her hands for a long time. She could smell the rot of the underworld on her fingers. She hadn't noticed it while she was down there. But now she was ashamed, worried that someone passing by would recognize the stench of death on her. Iniko jumped up on a windowsill and watched pigeons conduct their democratic disputes. The boy curled up against the stone wall, clutching his sister's map, a failed mission, but his only remaining connection to her. In the days that followed, Akshita did not return home. She walked the streets accepting food and change in exchange for a repaired hem there and a darned sock there. As word spread that her work was meticulous, neighbors brought sacks of work, offering greater sums of money and places for her and the boy to spend the night. She taught the boy how to thread a needle and how to rip seams. Together, they sorted through the sacks, determining what was worth fixing. People who knew her family whispered to each other. Some said she had become selfish, unwilling to care for those who had given her a roof for so many years. Others said she looked less tired, her color improving. Either way, her family never talked about her or came to look for her. It was as if they were happy to pretend she had never existed. The boy stayed with Akshita until his strength came back and he stopped crying. Then one evening, he left without ceremony. He did not say where he was going. He gathered the map and the few items he'd been able to buy himself with the money he'd earned with Akshita, a cup to cook food in, new shoes, a hat for cold nights, a needle, thread, and some buttons. He did not look back as he left. Akshita knew that he had a journey ahead of him and that his pain was not something that she could carry for him. Iniko returned to familiar routines. He slept, he ate, he listened to rodents scurrying in the night. Sometimes, in the early morning light, he felt the vibration beneath the ground, reminding him of the city below his feet. He ignored it. Like weather gathering far away, it was something best left to its own devices. Trying to intervene was pointless and exhausting. Down below, the underworld continued on as usual. The square where Akshita had sat mending clothes grew untidy. Coats piled up, people spat on them. The woman with the doll wrapped her feet in rags and hobbled around in pain. The man with the coat now walked around in stained long johns. The woman with the bent nails added to her pile and started counting again. Without repairs, people complained less about what needed fixing and more about where they were going. Some sat down and refused tasks that they had never agreed to do but had always performed. Others argued, left, returned, argued, left again. The needle Akshita had left behind went unnoticed until, one day, a young girl was kicking at the ground, bored, and she noticed something reflecting small bits of light back at her. She had never seen such a thing, so small and sharp. It reminded her of when her older brother took her fishing. She bent it into the shape of a hook, taking her time, remembering everything she'd lost when she left her life behind. She pulled a loose string from her dress, slipped it through the small hole, and tied a knot like her brother had taught her. She had nothing to place on the hook for bait, and nothing to catch in the wet puddles, but her willingness to plan for something better caused the roots towards the surface to shift and loosen slightly. Not enough for someone to slip through, but enough for her to look up and wonder. Above ground, nothing improved in ways that could be charted. The city remained crowded, garbage still collected in corners, writhing with maggots and rats. Hunger resulted in crime. But there were interruptions to expected routines. A tailor closed early one afternoon and walked home in daylight to spend time with his small child. A bounty hunter tore up an arrest warrant and let a woman pass a checkpoint to see her family. A man, working for a corrupt businessman, took off his tailored jacket and went to sit by a river to think about what he wanted from life. These acts did not redeem anyone. They did not solve large problems. They merely introduced freedom to choose. As time passed, Aniko grew old and frail. His gaunt body lay in the sun outside of Ekshita's new home, where she accepted work, entertained friends, and slept comfortably in a bed of her own. In his sleep, Aniko dreamed of roots loosening, of cities that learned the art of community, and people who looked up and wondered what might happen next.